So Cynthia, if you can hear me, do you think we should get started?
We have Jack and I are here in the pack, and we have an additional person. Ronna Mack is here, and we think there might be a couple other people join, but it's Alicia and Kelly who've been here before, and so kind of know part of the spiel. So we'll make sure that we get them acclimated where they be, and they'll be logged in on the polling piece and everything. So, okay, and as they come in, I'll have conversations with folks then as well.
Okay, so does that mean we should get started?
Yes, it does. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Hello. So thank you for coming to this task force session. This is our fourth one this week. And I've got to say the conversations have been really quite intriguing and interesting so far, right? And hopefully you've seen some of the results and data that we've been posting as we go, and there'll be lots more to come, of course, right? So just to introduce myself, I'm David Burrell with Future IQ. I think I've met almost everybody on the screen. And as you know, we did the visioning process with the City of Smithville last year. And from Future IQ, Heather Brannigan. So if you can wave, Heather, so everybody can see. Yep. So Heather's on the call. And for the comprehensive planning, we're partnered with JSA, which is a great firm out of Washington, DC. And we have John Stover.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, and Leslie Deacon. Okay, thanks. And so the sort of match there is, you know, obviously we have the whole history of the visioning, and John and Leslie are really very clever and competent economic developers and planners. So it kind of makes a really nice, sweet team, I think, for this project. So, so welcome everybody, right? So the format for this is going to be a series of sort of steps that we'll go through, right? So there'll be some discussion points that, you know, some slides will show, which will catch you up on some of the results from the survey and so on, some background. Then we want to do some rapid polling, so live polling, real-time polling on a series of questions on each of the topics we want to cover. And then we want to have a group discussion. So for the time of the presentation and the rapid polling, I'll be sharing my screen. And then when it's time for us to have a group discussion, and there'll be three or four big group discussions, that we'll go back to this format where we can all see each other, and you know, makes it a bit easier perhaps to have a good dialogue, and makes it feel like we're talking to humans, right? So, okay, so let's go. So I'm gonna just set up to share my screen here. Just give me a second. Right. Okay. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up if you can see the screen, it's all good. Okay, excellent. Okay, so you would have got these instructions on the registration, right? So we are, as part of the rapid polling, if you haven't already, we're going to ask you to, on your smartphone, to download the Poll Everywhere app, or you can do it on you get access on the laptop and get it from Google Play or the Apple Store, and you can register to set up an account. And then we'll give you the username for this particular poll when we get to that point, which will be in about 10 or 15 minutes. And I'll show you this data again, but if you haven't downloaded Poll Everywhere on your phone, if you can do that while we're going through the introductory slides, that'll help speed it up a lot. Oh, and also I'll be presenting primarily, but John and Leslie will jump in, particularly on some of the discussions in the background, explaining some of the material. And Heather may be sending you chats if she needs to collect details, because we are doing a bit of a virtual registration. So you may see some chat messages coming from Heather if she needs to find out who you are. So now the poll, so I've covered the first 2 points. The third one is that this format obviously is virtual, and there is an in-person component at the Performing Arts Centre. It is being recorded. And Cynthia, are we live streaming this one today?
Yes.
Yeah, we are. Okay, good. So if you could just mute your audio on your phone or your laptop if you're not talking, right? That way we can avoid any background noise and just make it cleaner for people who may be watching or watch it later, because we will be recording and posting this. So the steps for tonight, right? So first step, we're going to just take 10 minutes to do a bit of an introduction, recap on the pillars, and talk about planning implications. So sort of starting to translate from the vision into the comprehensive planning, you know, the sort of that translation step. And then we want to really dive into tonight's topic, which is not actually recreation connectivity at the top there. So we're talking about small town feel and community. So we're going to review some of the community survey results and explore some of the background elements. Then we've got, some kind of questions we want to pose to you, because what we've been doing is developing some ideas around planning, but we want to really test and validate those with you tonight. And part of that's going to be the rapid polling, and part of it's going to be the discussion. Then we'll have a Q&A at the end. We have a little bit of a homework assignment for you from between now and the next task force session, which is in a month's time. So that'll be a bit of fun. And then we'll be done, certainly be done within the 2 hours. The other sessions have run about 1 hour and 45. So we'll be finishing somewhere between that and 2 hours. So just a quick recap, right? So what is a comprehensive plan? Well, it's, in this case, it's really the vision and the roadmap for the future Smithville, right? So what the city, I think, has done, it's been really smart to do, is to do the comprehensive planning back to back with the visioning. So the visioning and the comprehensive planning has really just been one sort of fluid process. So it allows us to keep that kind of conversation going. Cities sometimes do a visioning and then they'll do the comp planning later on, and you sort of get this disconnect, and the community can't follow the logic. And actually what's really fascinating here is seeing this really core group of people who are involved in the visioning, who are now participating through the comp planning, right? So I think it adds a really good validation for the community to make sure you're setting up the framework that's going to guide your decision making for the next 10 years and make sure you get to your preferred future. Just an overview of the process. So as many of you know, we launched the comprehensive planning in January, and we were close to swinging into these task force sessions and engagement when the pandemic hit, right? So what we ended up doing, working with the staff, was we flipped the process, right? So we've been working on technical background work. We ran the community survey. We've had about 355 people complete the community survey as part of this comp planning process. And then obviously we've reinitiated these task force sessions. And so really through July and August, and actually, the end of July now, but August and then early September will be a lot of opportunity for people to weigh in on this. So we're going to be running discussion boards. We'll be posting material out of these sessions all the time. And obviously you'll have a chance to look at, draft comprehensive plan in September. And then obviously it goes into the approval process. And then of course the fun part, which is the implementation. So the layers of this, this is sort of the schematic of what we're following. So there's some terms here that I want to just sort of touch on so you understand what we're talking about. So in terms of building our pathway down to a comprehensive plan, so starting with the community vision, so we've done that. That sort of produced a really good a clear set of community aspirations. What we've been doing is working on translating that into planning implications. Then we've done a lot of work, and we're going to talk a bit tonight about character area projections. And I'll talk more about character areas in a moment, but it's a way to think about the sort of geographic implementation of a vision inside of a city. And then there are overlay topics such as transportation, trails, and those type of things that sort of run across the whole city landscape. That all then informs a future land use map. And that's really the sort of framework that allows you to think about what you want to have happen where and what you don't want to have happen. So that's the sort of, at the simplest version, that's the important piece. And then that obviously informs the comprehensive plan. In terms of developing this plan, we wanted it to be very unique and specific to Smithville. So I know Melissa's on the call, and she certainly was really keen on this idea of making sure that this was something a bit different, right? So because comprehensive plans can be, they can be sort of a subject for the select few, the specialist planners or the, people like that. But we wanted to really make something that really helped the community understand the process from the visioning, follows the pillars process through. Obviously engaging the youth throughout the visioning was very strong. Obviously we're a bit of a bump in the road with the pandemic and this particular part, but a lot of youth have done the community survey that we've been running. But we also wanted to make this very visual, right? Because the way we can help turn a comprehensive plan into an interesting document is to have it in a way that people can see and visualize the future and really think about it in a way that they can sort of almost kind of be quite tactile about how this future might look. Smithville has an aspiration to be a high-performing community. It's a high-performing school district. So we want to leverage best practices. So what we're also trying to bring into this is a lot of what is the really good thinking about how cities are evolving, both at the level of longer term trends, but also in terms of what may be some shorter term implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and so on. Just thinking about how that's going to, maybe perhaps evolve cities and things like that. So just as a bit of a recap, you've all seen this, right? So this is the scenario planning framework we developed in the visioning. That led us through to this concept of the expected future and the preferred future. Obviously, the comprehensive plan is the framework for the community to go, okay, how do we pivot our trajectory so that we are now heading towards this preferred future? And the elements we're going to go through tonight are definitely a very core part of that. So the way we sort of ended up in the visioning was we had this notion of Smithville, a modern community oasis designed for 2030. And there's a whole lot of meaning in those just brief set of words there, this whole community oasis, and we're going to really dig into that concept particularly tonight. It's supported by these big strategic pillars: the continued commitment to education, enhanced recreation and connectivity, diverse housing and neighbourhood options, strengthened business and economic development, and we've had task forces on those last three this week. And then tonight, of course, we're doing the retention of small town feel and the sense of the community. And this has been a topic that I think right from the very get-go of the visioning, that people were really interested in making sure that this kind of flavour and character and feel of the community ended up going the right way. That was what people were both loved about Smithville, but also were concerned that it might get lost if development or trajectories headed in the wrong direction. So this is a really important one. And this one's a little, I think tonight's conversations, it's got an element of sort of experience, as well as an element of kind of hard planning. So some things like neighbourhood options and things like that, they can be more practical planning. This one is really trying to target what's the experience of different parts of Smithville as you go around, and what does that evoke in you as a resident and as a human as you live your life in this community. So this is too much to read, obviously, but just to sort of show you, we've had these pillars at the top, the community aspirations that came out of the visioning, and we've been working on these planning implications. I'm going to talk more about those, but I just want to touch on this character area conversation we're having. So character areas were defined in the 2005 comprehensive plan. And what we've done is evolve those, right? So a character area is, the simplest I can say it, it's thinking about parts or areas of your community and what would be a particularly distinct or unique kind of character and flavour that gets developed in that area. And so we've sort of penciled out these 5 character areas, and they all abut, so they're contiguous. Areas of Smithville that are outside of that are essentially rural or green space. They're agricultural or just forested areas or just green space. And we don't expect those to have any development in the next 10 years. So we think that all the action is going to occur within these 5 character areas, and some of those may not have any development. But what we're thinking about is, okay, really, how do we define the land use map and start to guide the sort of activity in each of these different character areas? I'm going to work tonight. We're going to talk actually about all of them, but we're going to particularly work on the Downtown Community Oasis character area. So we're on the retention, small town feel and sense of community. And in the community visioning, the aspirations that the community identified, there was 4 big ones, right? So creating this notion of a Smithville community oasis, and I want to talk more about that in our first discussion topic. People talked about utilising unique signage and promotion, to let you know that you're in Smithville and to sort of reflect the character. Applying design that fosters a small town feel, and John and Leslie will talk to this a little bit about you know, how you can think about things like density and heights and sort of colors and all those sort of things in a design world that help create certain sort of palettes and experiences, and talk about embracing environmental practices. So we're going to touch on all of these, but we're going to dig more deeply into several of these topics tonight. In terms of planning implications, if you go from that translation from here's community aspirations, what does it mean on a level of planning? Well, one of the things is what emerged was this notion of designating a sort of, so we've been talking about community oasis in some ways as like an experience, right? There's somewhere special. I've arrived in Smithville and it feels different and I can relax. And we thought in the planning to move to designate that actually in a really geographic sense. And so an area originally was proposed to encompass an area between the downtown and the lake, and create a protected environmental and community education zone. But we're proposing to expand that, and I want to spend a bit of time on that. Developing clear gateways and signage for the main character areas, especially for the expanded historic downtown. You know, a lot of people have commented every step in the process is that when you're driving 169, you don't really have any kind of warning or indication that there is an incredibly interesting experience sort of based Main Street just down the road, right? So that's come up at every topic. The idea of including community recreation areas and gathering locations, so this whole community connectivity, you know, creating entertainment, festivals, events, especially in new residential developments, or having those easily connected to parts of the community, and intentionally develop social infrastructure and local connection points within the community. So there's some of the community, and some of these topics have already been covered in other task forces, particularly trails. We talked about, that was really a lot about, you know, building connectivity in the community in different ways. So the discussion topics for tonight, right? So there's three big buckets we want to explore with you. So one is exploring the Downtown Community Oasis character area. So we want to take a deep dive into that. We want to talk about preserving and creating a small town feel, how to do that and get your feedback on input into that. And we want to talk about exploring gateway points and buffer zones in the community. So let's dive in, right? So let's explore this Downtown Community Oasis, right? So at a large schematic level, right, here it is blown up. And if you've had a chance, all of this is online. There's a really great platform you can get to from the portal that has these fantastic schematics of these different character areas, and you can scroll backwards and forwards or drag sideways, and you'll get the satellite image underneath, and or you can have the schematic over the top. And this Downtown Community Oasis character areas is what we want to dig into now. But I want to just give you a bit of a sense of where this came from, right? So what was the sort of evolutionary pathway? So when we were doing the visioning, on the top right there, you can see that set of squares with the blue dots, and they were the votes of what was the preferred future. You know, so you remember doing this, and the majority of the votes were in all that and a lake, right? So Smithville's obviously, you know, very defined by the lake, but it's got the lake and a lot of other things, and that was really a future that was pushing on being modernised and revitalised, but having an expanded worldview. But there was also a significant cohort of people in the top left, which is our evolving oasis was the name of that scenario. And that was where there's still this retention of this small town feel or a small town oasis, and we're modernised and revitalised. So the way we reconciled that in creating the pillars and the vision was to take the best of both of those and put them together, right? And so it creates this thing like, and it's this kind of puzzle of how do you create a modern community oasis that's designed for 2030? And it's, you know, if you get that right, you've created something that's really quite remarkable and extraordinary. And so through that process, this community oasis emerged as one of the scenarios. And it's the sort of concept where there'd be this sort of this nostalgic feel coupled with this modern sustainability environmentally progressive overlay, just as one level. And then the bold idea that was in the vision report that came from the community was about actually making this, and it was really quite towards the end of it was when we had the big maps on the tables and we were having the final sort of focus group sessions around, where do these sort of ideas land in Smithville. And it was this idea of creating this identifiable area between the downtown and the lake. And at that point, the trail was, starting to come into reality. But it's this area that could include trails, river walks, gardens, environmental habitat, and so on, but creates this really interesting sort of community connection point. The ideas evolved a bit, right? And so, and I want to just sort of talk a bit about what led to its evolution. So from the community survey that's been running now for a few months, one of the questions was, what does the experience of the community oasis mean to you, right? So we're probing that, right? And people talked about, as you can see, safe, relaxed and peaceful, walkable areas, vibrant downtown areas by the lake. So that's all sort of fits with the current part. Small town and modernised shopping plazas, north and south ends and so on, and a whole range of topics. And there's one quote that I think sort of captured the sentiment of a lot of the written responses, which was that, so he was talking about it, it means maintaining the historic feel to Smithville while increasing the number of businesses and offering community gathering points. A nice walkable downtown with some green space is key. Believe that a slight increase in density while maintaining the classic look would be wonderful, and we're going to probe this tonight, and classic looking signage. And so that was sort of an extra level of input. And then where we've ended up, and we want to, I want to talk about this for a bit, and then we're going to go into some polling with you to gather your thoughts. And Leslie, feel free to jump in with me as I go through this, right? So if you can see my cursor, right? So I have my little cursor. I'll put it right there in the middle of the historic downtown subdivision, the sort of pink part, right? So the original concept was for this community oasis to really go from the historical downtown and really pick up this area here of the floodplain. So essentially the floodplain area that is below Smithville Lake, and connecting it down into the downtown and part of perhaps the river behind it. As we started to look at that, and that in itself was a really exciting kind of concept, I think, of creating that historic downtown with that recreational open space sort of, conservation or environmental area right next to it, right? But as we started to go through the sort of discussions and the planning, I think it started to sort of dawn on us that to really protect that area, we had to really think about all the surrounding pieces to it as well, right? And so where we've ultimately ended up is we've actually gone to the north and proposed sort of, because there is a bit of terrain issue there. It's quite got some deep sort of channels through there. Adding that possibly as a proposed conservation area to the north end of this. There's a proposal here of some, perhaps if possible, a phased annexation of part of the Smith Fork Park to bring a little bit more city control over this area and expand that concept of the oasis. Then there's some potential additional residential to the northwest of that sort of large green area. But then as we come to the west side, this is part of what we want to probe with you tonight, is that this gateway entrance here, and everybody, as I've said, has said that that's a really critical moment, right? When you're coming into Smithville, right? When you come down this hill, right, and you can fly straight past that turn off to the downtown, right? So what we've talked about over and over is this idea of having some clear experience as you come down, and that entices people to perhaps make the connection to the downtown and go in there. And so then this red area here, and the land use zoning on the red is commercial, and there's a piece of it to the south and to the north along both sides of 169. And what we've sort of been thinking about is, well, if this is a really important gateway into an historic downtown, which then leads into a community oasis, we want to think about having some guidance or some influence over what happens in these areas. So I know a concern that people have is that, it ends up looking like a strip mall as you drive down 169. So, being able to have sort of some sub-districts and some planning to be able to exert some influence there. And the other part too that I just want to register here, if you can see it, and I'll show you on an expanded version in a little bit, but we've also proposed taking the historic downtown sub-district across the other side of 169, because there is that sort of land there there's not much going on with it right now, but again, to be able to create that sense of having some influence or control over the land on both sides of the road, but attached to this notion of this historic downtown sub-district. The other part too that we did was we pulled in part of the land down here in terms of Hellevy Park, if I pronounced that correctly, for some possible maybe future sort of exploration around some things like community gardens and so on, right? So Leslie, did you want to add anything to that, or did I cover that okay?
Yes, you covered that perfectly. I think you checked off all my talking points too.
Okay, good. All right. Is there any questions from anybody on this, just as clarification, right? Because we're going to dive into some sort of specific questions, and then we're going to have more discussion about it. But in terms of this community oasis, any questions of clarification? Okay, good. All right. So hopefully we'll probe some things here in the questions, right? So we want to go into some live polling now, right? This is where the fun begins, right? So grab your phone if you've got your phone, right? I'm assuming that you've registered. So if you haven't, on the bottom left here, or the left-hand side of this screenshot, if you've got the Poll Everywhere app open, across the bottom, there's a little button that says registration. Really simple. And you go to sign up, you just put in your email, password, first name, last name. That gives you an account, right? So for any rapid polling we do through the course of this project, you'll be registered and it'll be really easy for you. Once you've done that, if you go to the home button, and it'll come up with pollev.com/username, right? So the username for this poll is FIQ124. Okay, so you just put in FIQ124 and join, and we're going to dive in. Okay, so this is the first question, right? So this should now be showing on your phone, so you can just hit the A or the B. And sometimes there'll be more options. You can also change your selection. So if you scroll down the phone, it'll say, you can go back and change your selection if you want to. And this is really just a little test question, right? So you don't have to say what you really do. You can live here or not. Okay, good. And you can see that it was moving around as more people were voting, right? So it looks like it's stable now. So we're going to go to the first question. So let me just kind of frame this up for you before you hit the answer, right? So the broad concept of the Downtown Community Oasis character area aims to create a unique focus and connection center for the whole community. Do you think this is the right move? A, yes, a great idea. B, maybe you need to understand better. C, not on the right track. D, don't know. Okay. All right, good. Looks like most people are in, right? So pretty strong response there in terms of looks like a great idea, right? So, and what we're trying to test, if we're really trying to test, is what we've sort of been translating into the maps and these character areas, is that reflecting from your perspective what the community wants and what you want, right? So that's good validation so far. So I wanted to drill in on this section here, right? So we're going to ask questions about the historic downtown sub-district and this commercial area, which we've called Downtown 169 sub-district, which is to the north and the south of the intersect of, it's not actually Main Street, but it's the extension of Main Street and 169, right? That intersect point, you know what it is, right? So we're going to ask some questions about your thoughts about the expansion of that historic downtown sub-district to exert some sort of influence over what happens on both sides of the road there, and the same with the commercial district to the north and the south, both sides of 169. And our thinking about probing this is that, it's sort of how concerned are you about the wrong sort of thing going into one of these spots, right? So if imagine somebody said, okay, yeah, we're going to put a gas station or, right there, is that the right land use, right? And so having some sort of zoning or land use control there allows you to provide some influence or guidance, right? Okay, so the first question on this one is, the Downtown Community Oasis character area includes commercial land use west of 169. So it's actually west and east, north and south. Do you think that's the right move to peg that? Yes, a great idea. Maybe need to understand better. C, not on the right track. Don't know. All right. And you can see people still voting. So, you know, as the people vote, numbers go backwards and forwards. Okay, good. So, and so, Leslie, can you just make a note when we have the discussion that to come back and perhaps at least find out what people want to know more about, right? So that we can help, you know, provide information to clarify questions that people have. Because obviously some people are saying, well, maybe, but I need to kind of understand this. So let's have that as part of the discussion. Yeah, okay, great.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So let's go to the next one. Oh, okay, great. So this is a written response, right? So for the proposed commercial sub-district north of Main Street and Highway 169, so both sides of the road, what type of businesses do you think would be best suited in that area? So remember, we're dealing with the approaches from both sides into that really important intersection or that junction. So not right there, but on the approaches, particularly on the north side, both sides of the road, what type of businesses do you think should be there? And you can type in and you can do multiple ones. You could say, you know, I want to have a boutique, for example, right? and then just submit that, or you can type something else and submit that as well, right? So I'll just give you a little bit of time to type in your responses. And doing it this way, right, is, you know, it gives us the flavor, right, of what you're looking for, right? As it, you know, so this is a way for, you know, we can start to see, you can already start to see the sort of almost like a character of this area emerging in terms of, you know, bistros and niche businesses, family boutiques. Restaurants and so on, coffee shops, bistros, some retail, outdoor. The bar, I was waiting for the bar to come. All right, good. Okay, good. And you can see a flavor there, right? You can see this kind of, and the word I keep noticing when coming through here is unique, right? And this is a word that runs through the entire, the thread. It's like it's a gold thread that runs through the whole fabric of the Smithville story of, you know, from vision right through the comprehensive plan is unique. I mean, that the wanting to be different from the homogeneous mass out there is a real defining piece here. All right, good. So it looks like we're pretty all in on that, right? So I'm going to go to the next one. The historic downtown sub-district is proposed to be extended to the west of 169. So this is the historic downtown, right? So think of that core where you've had the Main Street sort of redone. And we're proposing to extend that sub-district just across the road of that intersection on both sides, north and south, right? To provide some control or guidance over what happens there, right? And so we want to get your reaction to that. So what do you think this is the right move? Yes, great idea. B, maybe need to understand better. C, no, not on the right track. D, don't know. Interesting, that's pretty strong. And it's sort of an odd thing in a way to be asking, because there's nothing there at the moment, right? It's not like it's, you know, a bunch of historic buildings, right? But what we're thinking is maybe a way to really help amplify that entrance point to that historic downtown, which is such a big defining part of Smithville. Okay, good. Looks like everybody's in. So again, we can come back and explore what we may need to understand better. And again, you get to write on this one, right? So this is now right at that junction of Main Street and Highway 169, right? So this is the, you know, this is the where you put the pin in the map. This is the spot, right? We know it's a critically important location. So what would you like to see there that is kind of around that junction, right? So it's within that historic downtown sub-district. If you know, look at the support from the previous one, you know, it could be nothing like a park, like you say, or it could be some entrance or something like that. So if you could just want to have a go at typing some words that reflect what you think could be or should be in that area. Interesting. You know, I see a lot of words there that are sort of create the moment, right? The signage, the welcome, and public art, so on, connecting to the river walk, statue, so on. And we're going to actually dig into this a little bit further later on too, in terms of this particular intersect, because signage has been one of the things that people have talked a lot about that needs to be improved to create part of the small town feel. Okay, good. So I'm going to go to the next piece here, right? So thank you for all your input on that. So this is now about the Downtown Community Oasis, which is, we're now going to focus on the green space floodplain, which is between the downtown and the lake. So that 100-year floodplain and the adjacent areas. So there's that sort of buffer fringe around it and what might happen in that, right? So if you think of that area, so from the downtown through to the lake, you've got the road and the trail on the south side. Obviously, you have, you know, sort of a buffer to the north. What if that's part of this oasis experience? How do you think, or what would you like to see? How you'd like to see that used? So, A, leave untouched as wildlife habitat and green space. B, create environmental education areas and trails. And you would have seen examples of those. They can be quite interesting. C, expand recreation parks and community gardens. D, all of the above. Or E, none of the above. Okay. All right, good. So that gives us a little bit of granular information there. That's great. Thank you, right? Let's just go to the, I think this is the last question. Oh, no, we might have another one. So the Downtown Community Oasis character area proposes a new river walk behind the main street and perhaps beyond. And I didn't really call that out a lot in the diagram, but it follows the river on the backside of Main Street. So it's a sort of it would be a way to connect the trail that goes, say, from the lake, you know, from Heritage Park to the north side over the back of town, and then ties into that area across the road we were just talking about. So do you think that's a good idea, right? And it might be a seasonal, right? Because it is a flood plain, so it might be underwater sometimes, but you can build things that survive that. Yes, great. A good idea. B, maybe need to understand better. C, not a good idea. D, you don't know. Okay, good. Okay, good. Well, I think the Trails and Recreation group from Tuesday night would be very happy to see this. Okay, so let's have some discussion, right? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. And we want to have a little bit of discussion here, just now to explore what did you get out of that sort of polling? What does that tell you? And Leslie, do you want to help pick up on some of the probing some of the areas that people perhaps wanted to at least, and we may not answer all the questions, but we can at least, you know, scope out what we need to be thinking about so people can understand concepts a little bit better. So, but first of all, I'll just throw it open.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. So I'll throw it open. What's your reaction to that downtown kind of community oasis in general sense, right? The scale and what we're trying to talk about in it and how it ties together. You know, I know you voted, but you know, I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts in real person time. So the good thing is I can see you. So who would like to? What about Angela? Would you like to? Danny, you're on the Planning Commission. What's your thoughts? Get us started here.
I know that there's been talk of a river walk, like not hush hush, but like it's not been a big movement. But I know that I've heard talk of it here and there over the last couple of years. I think it's a great idea. I talked with that committee during our last meeting, so that was a month ago. And one of the things that I talked with them about is my husband and I just got back from a vacation in Colorado, and in Estes Park, that's one of the things that they've done is they have a river, I think it's the Fall River, that flows right there through, like right down Main Street, but it's on the back side of like all of their really, really nice restaurants and shops and that kind of thing. And what they did is they went through a process where they like paved all of that, and part of it has fencing up. Part of it is like really neat access down to the water, but they basically what they did is they added facade to the back of the buildings. And so now like the shops, you can enter from both sides and it's really cool. And when I came back, I was super excited about that and was like, we could do this. Like that's something we could see happen. Heritage Park already has a walking trail that goes along that river on the back side of it. So you've ever been to the walking trail that goes all the way around, that back half of it already hits the river. So I'm like, we already have part of that kind of already done. We would just have to get it across to the other side. And if something did expand to the other side of 169 and there was a place for like either fishing or like a dock access or something, not like to boat off of, but like to stand on to fish or something like that, that would be a really neat place to like park and have some really cool signage over there. And I could just think of some really neat things. I love the idea. Super excited about that. So.
Okay. And actually I didn't really point it out, but the that other side of 169, that's also where some of the regional trails are proposed to come in as well, right? So it ties in, so it sort of gives you a different route or a different option. And it's really interesting what you said about the orientation to rivers. I mean, you go to so many towns where the backyard was the river, right? And I presume the rivers were probably polluted, and that's where, you know, you just went and turfed everything over the fence, right? And today, you know, obviously society's changed, and having those amenities where you can have, you know, that sort of outdoor dining and those type of things, or, you know, sort of decks and things like that, could be really interesting.
I agree.
Some other
That would be
thoughts?
great.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Other thoughts? Who else would like to share some perspective?
And I would love to probe too, if there's any downside to that. We've heard a lot of, you know, it makes a lot of sense as a concept. Two of your biggest assets being the downtown and the lake. We know connectivity is a big thread of kind of what propels kind of future planning efforts and growth. Is there anything to really be mindful of or even hesitant about as it relates to kind of having a river walk that connects to the downtown?
I had a comment too, I think. Did you?
Oh, not about the Riverwalk. I think that's a great idea. I'm curious as to how we would connect the quaintness of the town to that intersection, because there seems like there's things in between, like the hospital and the apartments and things like that really don't, that's not really a walking area or a shopping area, or, you know, it's like two separate areas. I don't know how we would bridge those two. So I'm just wondering.
We're going to explore that a little bit in the next section, right? We want to dive a little bit more into the downtown, but also remember on that too, and I don't know, Nikki, you may want to jump in on this, but there's the Main Street program, which is starting, and that's that really granular level of how do we build infill and how do we tie all this together. That's the whole perfect value of a Main Street program, right? Because it allows you to work your way through that. Nikki, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and not to put a shameless plug in, but we're having another board meeting for the Main Street group on August 24th. And really the point of that meeting is to zero in on what our specific kind of goals and outputs are going to be over the next 2 years with them. So I think some kind of land use and diving into connecting the comp plan to the long-term Main Street plan is going to be a priority of ours for sure. So, because we haven't really, with that group, I mean, we got kicked off and then COVID happened. So we haven't really gotten into that level of detail at all.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to think, if we're putting stuff out on 169, I want to make sure, I think our hardest thing right now is pulling people off the highway. Yeah. And if it starts, you know, if you put your big thing that's going to bring people in on the highway, it's not going to pull them off again. They're going to stop right there on the highway, and then they can get right back on and go, you know, north or south and head on out. If you put smaller things, I think that bring people down, they'll be like, oh, look what's down the street, and keep going down there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's how I've heard everybody talk about it is we want to somehow or other slow people down long enough to get their attention, that they know it's there and they're enticed to take the turn, right? As opposed to, oh, what was that? Oh, I just flashed past my window, right? So yeah, I think we're well clear on that.
I think it needs to be something too that's more than just a sign that gets people to stop, but to be able to get out of their vehicle, that has that small town feel. I saw some of the words like the fountain and the parks and those types of things that I thought was really cool. the one concern the thing that I thought of right away, I guess, is my sister lives down on the plaza. And so like if you take 71 down, you've got all these stoplights on Highway 71. And the reason that they did that was a stoplight was to try and get people to stop versus a bridge that goes across. And a stoplight didn't obviously do a whole lot versus making sure that environment and atmosphere is inviting. And if we're putting something on the west side, my thought is, I mean, if we're just putting two things over there, then people aren't going to be drawn to go to the west side, and it's going to be forgotten about versus everything being, the majority being on the east side. So trying to have that balance between interests on both sides. And if it's something that's like, oh, hey, we've got something that's lake related, we need boat supplies or tubes or skis or something like that, you know, is, I guess, a couple of things that I thought of.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's going to be that interplay between that part of the heritage sub-district and then the commercial sub-districts, right? So, you know, thinking about that interface, you could come up with something there that could be really clever, right? In terms of both a visual experience, but also a really appropriate sort of service amenity center, right? For people who are, you know, about to go fishing, they can get their bait or whatever they need to do. And, you know, there's a whole, thinking through that, I think is going to be a really important step. Leslie, did you want to just lead us through to probe a little bit those two topic areas where there was some people who wanted more information or?
Mm-hmm. No, I think those are really great points. And Angela, I appreciate you kind of stretching our minds on that too, because that intersection, I know we've used this term gateway a lot, and even on our diagrams, we're talking about a gateway into downtown. I think the topics that you're bringing up and some of these concerns, it's stretching it more from being like a physical gateway to really addressing placemaking in that whole area. So how all four corners kind of come together to create a place beyond just establishing a sign to get you to turn, but creating that feel right from the onset. And I think that goes perfectly too on like why expanding west, the conceptual thinking of downtown, bridging that west across 169 emphasizes that idea of placemaking and experience. From a commercial land use perspective, I know there was some questions or some people might not be too sure on what all of that means. Within that sub-district, there are existing commercial uses, of course, so you have some development already there. There's also, just to be very clear, that's obviously where that cemetery is like smack dab in the middle of it. So there's some areas that likely, especially with the cemetery, you're going to see those existing uses continue. I think what we're curious about probing more and getting more in depth with is what are some of the experiences that you either see, so either walking or driving, and then what are some of the experiences from even a pedestrian or as we explore maybe complete streets and bicycle infrastructure. Are there elements that kind of bring the scale of 169 being very heavily trafficked into the pedestrian scale so that you can get up and walk around and really experience this in a new way in the next 10 years from what we've had in the past. I'm like very intrigued by the Riverwalk and some of these conversations when we think about it as small town feel, and John was I think alluding to a similar point too. Is I'm curious to hear more how the Riverwalk meets the Main Street. So we see all this emphasis on Smithville's Main Street and the great streetscaping, beautiful streetscaping investment that's been made into the downtown, and the Main Street program coming in to help support those businesses and enhance that placemaking. Is there any ideas, or has there been any conversation amongst anybody about how the Riverwalk might meet that Main Street commercial street? And are these experiences that you would be looking for to different experiences completely, where you want a meandering path, and if you're on the Riverwalk, you wouldn't go to the downtown stores? Or is there an opportunity there to provide more reasons for people to go downtown and stay downtown and shop and dine and experience, the small town that Smithville celebrates. So just some lingering thoughts. I don't know if anybody has any comments or feedback on some of those elements.
Well, I know that there's two people that do, because they just posted comments on it. And Lara, yours was kind of right on and kind of right pretty much on topic to Leslie's as she was talking. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit about your concerns about kind of the different land uses and how to bridge across them.
I don't know what a solution might be. I just know that serving the church that sits on the river, and then knowing that our immediate next door neighbor is a private residence rather than a commercial use property, things along those lines, just in that stretch between Bridge Street and Heritage Park, that could end up becoming a fair amount of challenge when the other side of the river is the housing authority. So just keeping in mind that it may be more complicated than we intend for it to be, trying to have a cohesive trail or some sort of walk that's going along the river. I'm really interested in the idea, and I think that it could be great. And I know that it starts to get more troublesome whenever we start dealing with private homeowners who own chunks of that land, et cetera.
Yeah, Lara, that's great actually, but that's life, isn't it? Everything gets more complicated than we think, right? And I guess what we're at the level of a comprehensive plan, we're trying to frame out a 10-year trajectory, right? What we want to put in the peg for the big ideas, right? And knowing that it may take some time for those to materialize.
Right. I have no intention of sinking the idea. You had just asked what are some of the potential challenges. I think that might be the biggest challenge, frankly.
Sure. Okay, good. So we have some other topics we want to roll on to, right? So thank you for your input on that and great sort of comments on the chats as well, right? So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to start to talk a bit more about this small town feel, and we want to sort of drill into that with you a little bit as well. So just let me just set this up. All right. So, okay. All right, so we want to talk about preserving and creating the small town feel. So as I, have sort of talked about, this has been really an issue right from the very get-go of the visioning in terms of not making sure we don't lose that, right? And so this is some data. I'm going to show you some data from the community survey that's been running, and we can start to explore that, because there's actually some really good questions in that community survey that sort of give us a sense of what does a small town feel. It's a concept, right? So what we've been trying to do is really nail down more specifics about it in terms of what do people think creates a small town feel, or what's the elements that come together that create that experience or that notion. So 51% of the survey respondents said they consider Smithville Lake to be critically important in helping to maintain and celebrate the small town feel of the city overall. And I think that's probably because it's such a unique and identifying facet, not many small cities have a lake like that. It certainly puts you into a different category. In terms of some of the other survey data, we asked people, or respondents considered the following elements. They considered these following elements critically important to helping to maintain and celebrate the small town feel of Smithville. So 39% of people said that trails and connectivity was critical, and then we heard that very strongly in the recreation task force that talked about that the sort of trail network could be a very unique value proposition for this community, and a real distinguished or a defining sort of value proposition. Walkable environment, 35% of people said they felt that was critically important. So I'm just showing the critically important. I mean, there was lots of others in these same topic areas said important, but critically important is right on the end of the scale. Locally owned establishments and businesses, there was, that came up in the conversations we've had, and I think in most of the task forces. We certainly talked about it in terms of the tourism component and the notion of sort of local foods and so on. But this sense of a locally owned and not just, it's a series of chains or the franchises. Parks and recs, recreation spaces, 38%, historic downtown, 35%. So these are sort of the elements. If you start thinking about how people in Smithville are thinking about what defines the small town, these are the type of elements that keep coming to the top. And part of it obviously is this sense of community, right? And so we asked people about how would you go about furthering connecting Smithville, so and bringing people together. So hosting more festivals and community events, developing and connecting trails and parks, creating a trail app, quality restaurants, not sure, and then a series of other sort of topics, but you know, they're all of a similar theme, right? So we feel like we're getting pretty close to really understanding what's that sort of combination that creates small town feel for people in Smithville. And sort of my perspective of it, if you read all the survey responses, what you hear people talking about essentially is that this small town feel is really an experience that, you know, triggers sensations of, like, for some people it's nostalgia and relaxation, you know, because it's a journey into maybe an historic downtown, so it kind of evokes memories. You know, it can be unique and interesting, so it kind of like wakes us up in a way. Connectivity and fun, so a lot of that notion of coming together as a community to have festivals and events. Intriguing and vibrant, and intimacy and aliveness, and intimacy being the sort of, you know, we know each other, right? We're part of this sort of community that sort of has a set of connections. And you can see some of the quotes there, right? You know, the charm of Smithville has a lot to do with the locally sourced businesses that exist nowhere else, and should be elements that I feel should be promoted the most. Carol, you'd probably like that. Definitely a sign showing an entrance to downtown and the shops and restaurants, etc. Also noting the parking walking trail downtown. So you're only just talking about that. But you can sort of see this type of sentiment, and the top sort of quote there talks about this urban vibe. And it's really interesting in this sort of puzzle of this vision, because part of the vision is also about a modernized and revitalized and expanded worldview. And so there's this sort of, there's also an element of not like a stuffy old historic downtown, but a little bit of a sort of even a cosmo cool or a vibrant sort of thing is something that some people have been talking about in the surveys. In response to the question, and in your view, what new signage would help retain the small town feel and sense of community? So we're now trying to think about sort of the practical elements that sort of inform our visual experience, that then informs our sort of a more emotional experience. Downtown entrance signs, new signage is important, city entrance signs, wayfinding, no signs needed, informational signs, and so on, right? But you can see that the downtown entrance sign really kicks right to the top there for people. This one's maybe a little harder to see, but let me just give you the overview. So this was from the community survey, and we were probing more the sort of, what are the elements, right? So the question is, how important are these elements in helping to maintain, celebrate the small town feel of Smithville's downtown, right? And the score here is a scale is sort of 1's not at all important, 10's critically important, right? And so the thing to note, first of all, is that everything was viewed as important. They're all right. They're all, so there wasn't any here that you'd really drop off because they didn't score well enough. So, but everything from public spaces, pedestrian friendly atmosphere, business and retail storefronts, architectural design, streetscapes, brick facades, community events and celebrations, gateways, local businesses, recreation park services, community spaces, cohesive and consistency of design. Everything's important, right? So what people are saying is you've got to get all of these pieces together to really create that small town feel and sense of community. And I think if you get it together in a really good way, then you've got something that's truly fantastic, right? If you can put all those pieces together, you have something to talk about. So this starts to get a little bit more visual now, right? So in the survey, we asked people, and we also did this at the launch of the comp planning process as well. So to accommodate for the increases of uses, so this is in the downtown, what type of density would you like to see in Smithville's downtown? So this is a really important element of thinking about that small town feel, because the downtown is really seen as an anchor for that, right? And the downtown and the lake, and perhaps if we can get this downtown community oasis, it becomes a real anchor for the small town feel. So we don't want to mess it up by developing it in a way that starts to erode that small town feel. And density is one of those things that can change the experience of a location fairly dramatically. So we gave people the choice of these photos to say, what would you be willing to, or what would you want, or what would you be willing to embrace? And so one was no change in density, so the way it is, right? The second photo was a slight increase in density, so there's perhaps a little bit more height and a little bit more of it. Then there was a moderate increase in density, so that was these two photos. And you can see now we're talking sort of 4 stories, and you're talking, something that's sort of more that you'd see as some infill and building off the core of an historic buildings, but there'd be some perhaps newer ones that would have perhaps a more sort of historic facade, but you've certainly got more density, right? A moderate increase in density, or people were given the choice then of a significant increase in density, which is you're now starting to look at 6 stories and much more physically imposing buildings and so on, right? So in the survey, people were able to see these photos. And so the question was, so to accommodate for the increase in uses, what type of density would you like to see in Smithville's downtown? And you can see most people there were for the moderate increase in density, moderate or slight. And if you look at those photos, so that's the significant, not many people jumped on that, 9% said they'd go that far. But the vast majority of people were saying this is the sort of density that would be palatable, so somewhere in this slight increase to this moderate increase. So I think what it gives is a fair bit of room to think about some of that infill and some of the potential development in the downtown. So we want to do a little bit of polling, right? So that's a little bit of background data on the small town feel. Now we want to dive into some questions with you, right? So same deal again. And if your phone may have disconnected if it hasn't been activated by the app, but it's the same username, FIQ124. And here's some questions, right? Do you think the elements that define Smithville's small town feel and experience are coming into focus, right? So do you think that from the data and the discussions, we're starting to really be able to piece together the pieces that would protect and maintain that? So yes, or A, yes, clear and consistent. B, maybe seems a bit vague. C, no idea what it means. Okay. So that's pretty strong, right? So, and I got to say, I'd probably be a yes on that too, that I think that what I'm seeing in the data is a clear and consistent set of components. I think the devil's in the details, right? And that's where we started to, probing the density, that gives us a more nuanced view of that. And I think some of those other areas, probably need the same sort of treatment, but that's strong. And it's really heartening that we're able to take a feeling that people had at the start of the visioning and be now at this point where we're able to think about what that actually looks like in a material sense. What description of the ideal Smithville downtown vibe would you think most reflects residents' desire? So let me just run through these and explain them a little bit, right, before you dive in. So the vibe is the feel, right? So it's that hard to define, but it's like, what's going on, right? And so so what you think residents of Smithville desire in their downtown. So is it like a nostalgic, which is that kind of like historic and, or is it classic? Is it vibrant, or is it cosmo cool? And the cosmo cool, just to explain that, is it's not cosmopolitan necessarily, but it has some of those elements. So it'd be some of those sort of more kind of restored warehouse type things would be sort of classically where you sort of think about cosmo cool. So have at it.
David?
Yeah.
Could you explain the difference that you perceive between nostalgic and classic?
Nostalgic and classic? Yeah, so I think that's, and Leslie, you may want to talk to this too. Nostalgic is, my interpretation of that is it's very much a throwback to the past, right? So it's like what it might have been once like, right? A classic kind of has this bit of a design element to it as well, right? So where it's got perhaps a little bit more elegance than just necessarily nostalgic, right? So it's an evolutionary step somewhere sort of between nostalgic and vibrant, right? So, but I think it's really drawing on the sort of physical design element. Leslie, do you want to add anything to that in terms of?
No, that was a helpful description. I think that this would be a really great point when we open it back up to conversation. I'd love to hear from people too, what some of how they would define some of these terms as they're voting for them.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. All right, good. So vibrant, very strong there, classic, a little bit nostalgic, right? That's what you think the residents desire, right? So the next question is, what description of the ideal Smithville downtown vibe do you think might most appeal to visitors? So people who don't live there, but people who are coming there for some experience. Now, it looks like we got a pretty close match, which is good, right? Because if they didn't match, that sort of becomes a problem, right? And because the challenge here is you don't want to end up being props in a sideshow. You know, you want to have a downtown that is your downtown, and the appeal to you, if it's the same as the appeal to the visitors, then you've got a nice match, right? You're not getting pushed aside or gentrified or, you know, something like that. It's really a shared set of desires.
And we just had a comment too of someone saying that they think it can be both classic and vibrant.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, that's good. So let's dig into that when we get into the discussion, right? And because that starts to move into, you know, some of this nuanced design that we will obviously need to get to. So here's a different question, right? So the downtown is currently a 2-block experience, if you want to call it that, right? That's what somebody called it last night. Ideally, over the next 10 years, what expansion do you think would be optimal, right? So no change, infill in that 2 blocks, because that 2 blocks is sort of like got a few, you know, gaps in the line. A sort of a 4-block experience, or 6 blocks or more, right? So we're talking about, you know, the scale of the expansion of that downtown core as an experience area where you would probably, you know, have, you know, some dining and outdoor and retail and so on. Okay. All right. So there's appetite here, right? So that's good. How hard do you think? So this is now a more general question about the character experiences, right? So how hard do you think we should push creating specific character experiences defined by design, architecture, and streetscaping? And this applies obviously to the downtown, but could also apply to other character areas that we're talking about in Smithville. So push hard and define clearly, A. B, provide general guidance, or C, let the market and developers decide. Okay, all right, good. Still got some voting, people changing their minds maybe. Okay. All right, good. So, and this, because this is really helpful in terms of, like, you know, in terms of a comprehensive plan, you're trying to, you know, either trying to guide or direct, right? And so getting that balance right, you know, that's what some of these questions are starting to probe into a bit as well. So thank you on that one. So different question. So local foods and culinary was seen as an opportunity for the tourism niche for Smithville. And it came out, you know, very clearly last night in when we were talking about tourism as an economic driver. And what people talked about was this unique local foods, but if you're going to have local foods, you've got to have a source of local food, you know, it's got to be authentic, right? So the other flip side of this is, do you think small scale agriculture should be encouraged in Smithville? And that's obviously then the source of local foods. A, yes, big opportunity. B, maybe, but we'll need a lot of work. Or C, no, it makes no sense. Interesting. All right, good. So we're getting some clear kind of continuity of views here from the different focus groups, which I think is really heartening. Okay, good, thank you. So, and this is sort of an overlay question. In your view, how important is environmental preservation and sustainability to the small town feel and sense of community for Smithville, right? So this is environmental preservation and sustainability is probably more of a modern concept, but what we want to know is how does this fit into today's feel of a small town feel and sense of community? So A, critically important, B, important, C, neutral, D, not very important, E, not important at all. Okay, good. All right, interesting. Thank you. Right. So obviously, you know, the majority of people, 88% right now, have said that it's either important or critically important. And that's part of what we're trying to understand in terms of, you know, this sort of environmental overlay, particularly in something like a community oasis, that area, you know, how do we weave this story into that area if it's important or critically important to create part of that small town feel and sense of community. All right. So let's flip to some discussion, right? So let me get us all back on the page. Okay, so some thoughts, reactions to that. What does that reveal? Leslie, did you have things that you noted you wanted to probe there? Or John, did you want to probe some of the downtown density?
Yeah, well, just to kind of set the stage too, you know, when thinking about some of the implications of these, you know, whether it's design or density, there's a few kind of key planning tools that would likely be the processes that would help to direct or inform or ensure those types of things. So there could be design standards or historic preservation standards to kind of help direct continuity or design or retain existing assets. And then a really big tool, of course, from a planning vantage point is zoning. That's kind of the fundamental tool in the toolkit for the city to help direct growth. And I think it's worthwhile, just as a backdrop, which I think most of us know, that you know, even saying we think more density would be suitable doesn't mean that the market is there. To my knowledge, and correct us if we're wrong, Jack, it's not like there's developers chomping at the bit to build, you know, a 6-story development downtown. So, but this is really the opportunity to say, where do we want to be 10 years from now? And before that type of activity, do we want to put in design standards or lower density that would not, you know, that would ensure kind of the continued scale? And it sounds, and also as just a quick backdrop, the current height allowance downtown is 60 feet, which is about 5 stories. So that seems to kind of align actually with what we've seen in the surveys. So that might say, hey, the market's not there. Nobody's necessarily building 5 stories right now. But if and when the market gets to that point, we're receptive to that as a community to allow that level of infill development and density. So anyway, I don't really have a question, but just kind of like fill those kind of planning mechanisms in the back of our minds.
Yeah, and thanks, John. Can I just also add, I'm just looking at the chat feed as well. So a couple of comments there. So Leslie too, I'll throw it to you in a second, but you know, there was that issue of the classic versus the vibrant, right? And somebody's made a comment about the classic would give us a cohesive design element, which I think is really interesting because vibrant is the experience and maybe color, and classic's more the sort of, you know, flavor of design. There's also a comment here from, I think from Nikki, which is Green Dirt Farm in Weston could work in Smithville. And Kelly's jumped on that as well. What's Green Dirt Farm? Just so I know.
Some of you may even know more. I've just been there once, but basically it uses kind of its specialty was creamery and cheese that it makes from local goats.
Okay.
But it's just a really cool, flexible place where during the day it's kind of a family-friendly ice cream stop. And during the night it turns into like you can get flights of beer or have wine. It's a very small building, and just seems like you could easily find somewhere to put the building itself. I just don't know what the market of, you know, finding that local, the local goats or agriculture. I don't know how far out you'd have to reach to get that. But I know a lot of people will travel there for something like that.
Yeah.
And Kelly, you may have more to add about that too.
Yeah, there are some small, I went to the Mo Eats session last year, and there was some local small scale, I don't know, they may not be in small scale farmers, but they were mixed farmers, right? So, but they were really sort of farm to fork type of, and I think that type of operation may not actually necessarily be in the city limits, but it has that relationship, which may be, providing produce into the local stores and as part of the local story and so on. Leslie, can I throw it to you in terms of the classic and the so on?
Yeah. I think actually what would be a really interesting conversation, and I'd love to get some more insights from everyone's perspective, is this idea of bridging the gap between either vibrant or classic, those types of elements, and actually getting to regulating or looking at design standards to kind of have a mechanism for controlling that feel and that element of the experience. And does anybody have any particular elements that they feel really either hits to classic or vibrant in terms of design, or kind of what you see when you're in Smithville small town or another small town? Like, is it storefront design? Is it having streetscaping furniture and different things at a pedestrian level? Or is it really like building height or building color or any other elements that
so just on that, Leslie, too, and we'll give people a chance, but let's make that part of the homework assignment, the digital assignment, where we were going to get people to take photos, right?
Perfect.
I think that'd be a great thing to drill in on, so that you could actually think about sort of really providing some material to us that really define classic, right? But sorry, I didn't want to interrupt that, but
no, that's a great point, because that is something that's definitely would be helpful to kind of let that sink in and really probe that more over the next few weeks. And I think too, when we look at what the comprehensive plan can set forth with these different elements and different factors that contribute to either vibrancy or that classic feel, it's different types of regulations that can address those things. So whether it's design standards or the architectural regulations, or is it zoning? And I think as we continue to understand the elements from your all's perspective, we can help lay out that foundation and that pathway to help achieve that.
Good. Okay, great. So let's just for time, we'll go to the next section, right? So we have one more kind of big topic, and then we've got some general discussion as well. So again, I'm going to share my screen, so I won't be looking at you. So let's go to this, right? Okay. All right. So the next topic we want to talk about is exploring gateway points and buffer zones, right? So we want to get your input on this, because we think this is a pretty important element in that whole experience of Smithville and the small town feel and so on, and the sense of community. So I'm going to go through, I talked earlier about character areas. we're not going to kind of go through these in great detail, but I just want to show you what's sort of being proposed. You can look at all of these on the portal. This is all loaded at the moment. So we have these 5 different character areas. So the North Residential, Downtown, and so on. We'll go down through each one of these, and I just want to show you a couple of things, right? So we're going to talk about a couple of things. So 3 things really in this section. So one is about buffer zones and green space. One is the Highway 169 corridor experience, and the other one is about gateways, right? And why this Highway 169 corridor experience, or why we want to sort of push on that a little bit, is that almost everybody in Smithville is probably going to be, almost every day is going to be traveling up and down Highway 169 because it's about what you got, right? And the thing about those regular sort of routes is we sort of get a little bit blind to what we're, driving past sometimes, right? And so we think that there's a sort of a danger, and it came out in the scenario planning, there's a sort of a danger that that's 169 can just end up being this kind of strip, right? And that development, not well planned, could end up just sort of creating this sort of visual kind of noise sort of up a lot of it. So we want to be quite intentional and thoughtful about as development is occurring. This happened. Was that somebody jumping in or? Okay. Okay, so and we also want to talk about buffers. So in this north residential space, right? So we have part of 169, obviously, and the residentials here in these different sort of shades of yellow. The lighter yellow is where there's already existing, and the sort of dark yellow or light green is where there's priority areas for development. But all of these have, the intention is to keep sort of vegetated areas or buffer areas. And obviously the lake has got a big natural sort of because of the zoning there. So that's one area that we've been probing. Another key area, obviously, which we've talked about is this gateway entrance into the downtown. So we want to probe that, a couple of questions on that as well. And obviously there's the sort of 169 corridor experience there. Another element here, so this is this hospital bluff character area. And that's really where a lot of the sort of what you call social infrastructure is currently located. So you have the hospital, the library, the high school, the commercial areas that are developed there, and obviously it butts up to the Downtown Community Oasis. But there's probably the potential here of a significant gateway. You can see where my cursor is towards the off the end of the red arrow there, a gateway into the hospital bluff character area that sort of goes down through there into the school and so on. Then there's what we're calling there's two parts to this southern sort of character area. So there's an 169 industrial character area and a 169 south character area. And the one I'm going to probe here a little bit is the south character area. And obviously there's a gateway entrance to Smithville, like when you actually arrive into the city limits, right? Although that's not particularly clear at the moment. And this south area, inside the 10-year comp plan, we're expecting to see some development occurring in this south character area. And the proposed development is mixed use and perhaps some higher density residential or commercial, right? And the right-hand side, because there's a regional trail proposed to come down through here and it's got some good vegetation buffers, it could lend itself well to some sort of higher density residential, which is we covered in the neighbourhood option discussion. But what we're sort of going to be interested tonight is, because we're thinking about this small town feel sense of community, is what's the experience of arriving in Smithville and what's the experience of this corridor? And just to show you a little bit of the data here from the Economic Development Task Force, we asked them about this experience from the highway. Should it be, new development should serve as a gateway engaging Highway 169 with residential buildings abutting the corridor. B, the corridor segment of Highway 169 should be commercial with residential buildings behind retail and office, or the experience should say much the same. You can see their responses, right? They were quite uniform on that. And I'll be interested to see, because we've got a different lens on it tonight, right? We've got a lens of small town feel and community, sense of community. And then of course there's the Southern Gateway entrance that I talked about. But of course the other part we want to probe when we get into the polling is what's the buffer between you and Kansas City, right? So at the moment, you leave Kansas City and you drive through the countryside and you arrive in Smithville, right? But we know that these mega metropolises are expanding, right? And Kansas City creeps north, right? So we want to be thinking about this sort of buffer, if that's something that's of interest, and at least put a peg in the sand on that one. All right, so that was some things to front load. So we want to do some rapid polling, and some of these questions are a little bit more complex, right? So let's have a go at it, right? So first one's pretty simple. So what do you think is the most important gateway location? So is it at the south end of Smithville? Is it that junction of Main Street and Highway 169, or is it the entrance to Hospital Bluff? If you had to pick the most important gateway, that would be part of defining small town feel and sense of community. Okay. Okay. All right, looks like most people are in. Pretty clear that most people are thinking it's that juncture of Main Street and Highway 169. All right. The next one here, the corridor, and I'm going to talk now about the corridors, right? And we're going to work from the south to the north, right? But I want to ask overall about the corridor first, right? So the corridor of Highway 169 runs the length of Smithville. How important do you think it is to have a a coherent plan to manage visual experience on a Highway 169, right? So thinking we're in a 10-year timeframe in the comp plan. So A, essential, we need to address this. B, moderately important but not urgent. Or C, not an issue. Okay. That's pretty clear response. Oops, people still voting. Just give you a second. Okay, looks like everybody's in. Okay, so we're going to do this now in segments, right? So we're going to run up Highway 169 from the bottom to the top. So along Highway 169 from the southern border to Route 92, right? So what that's going to pass through is the bottom two character areas. So 169 South, 169 Industrial, right? So what should be the experience and feel of new development be from the highway, right? So that you're on the highway, what's your experience, right? A, new development should serve as a gateway engaging Highway 169 with residential buildings abutting the corridor. B, it should be commercial with residential or industrial behind. C, the experience of this segment of the highway should include lots of protected vistas and green spaces. Okay, is everybody in? I should assume so, because that's exactly the same response from the other group, right? Oh no, good, there's one different. Two different, three, however many that is. All right, okay. Next one. So now we're going to look from Route 92 to the junction with Main Street, right? So that runs through the Hospital Bluff character area, right? So what should be the experience and feel? And this is just before you kind of jump in with a response, let me explain this, because this is a kind of interesting area because it's where all that commercial activity is and where some of the social infrastructure, as I mentioned, is as well. So what should be the experience? So A, new development should serve to create a bustling Midwest commercial feel with businesses abutting the corridor. And that would be probably more like your typical kind of sort of drive through, you know, some of those sort of areas where you probably have a lot of, you know, signs and activity and all that kind of stuff going on. B, businesses and buildings should be set back to create a broad boulevard experience. So more of a, you know, you're sort of moving through a sort of a landscape, but what's on the side doesn't dominate. Or C, the experience of this segment of Highway 169 should include some protected vistas, green spaces and trees. Okay. Okay, looks like most people are in. Oh, still some voting. Okay. All right, but this is kind of interesting because this drive, if you're coming into Smithville, you know, 99% of the time people will be coming in from the south, right? So this is the entry point, or this is the point before you get to the important gateway at Main Street. So now let's look at from the junction with Main Street to the northern edge of Smithville. So running right up through to the top. What should be the experience and feel of new development be from the highway? New development should engage the highway with residential buildings abutting the corridor. B, the highway should feel like a corridor with housing easily visible but set back. C, development should be set well back to create a broad open rural experience and protected vistas. So basically you feel like you're driving through farmland. Okay, good. So let that go for a second. All right, good. Thank you. Last question, right? So Kansas City metropolis is creeping north. How important is it to have a buffer of green space on the south of Smithville? So A, critical to create a full separation. B, need to be considering but not urgent. Or C, not an issue. So again, remember the context of this is we're thinking about small town feel and sense of community. And currently that green space creates the, you've left Kansas City, then you arrive in Smithville. Okay. All right, good. So, and this kind of then falls into some of that sort of planning and thinking about that bottom end of the city as it is at the moment. Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go to have some discussion here. Okay, so what jumped out at you in that exercise, right? What's your take home out of that? And John and Leslie, feel free to jump in and probes with some questions, right? Because we have to translate this information into planning language.
Something that stuck out to me was the contrast between that idea and this very strong demand for having that buffer between what's south of Smithville versus when you get into Smithville, and then having the strong interest for the Main Street gateway to be like the most important gateway. And in a way, to me, it kind of contradicts each other of like, where is it most important for there to be that gateway of like, if it's really Main Street, like, does it matter if there's no buffer at the south? If we're really talking about your experiences coming up to Main Street, or is it about establishing two different types of gateways of, that vista or the green space versus having a pedestrian gateway, so you scale into a pedestrian zone? I think it's pretty interesting from a planning perspective. That's a little bit rambly, so I don't think I have a question there, but more of kind of some curiosity. I don't know if anybody wants to specifically talk about why that green space buffer is important if we're talking about including a higher density use in that south area.
This is Melissa. I'll speak. I think it's important because I've lived here for 19 years, but when you go into Kansas City, if you really don't know, you don't know where you're at there. So that's where I think it's important to have that division, even if we are looking at the industrial and the higher density, to know I'm definitely in Smithville now. I think that's very important for what we're trying to do is saying we're unique. And I think that would add another unique element of you've got that green space and now, wow, I'm in Smithville and look what they have, without it being blended in. One side of the street's Kansas City and the other side's Gladstone or something like that.
Yeah,
Melissa,
that's a really good point, because one of the things that I think sort of gets combined a little in the small town feel for Smithville is there's that strong sense of a rural feel, and because you're surrounded by farmland, and so the moment that gap closes between Kansas City and Smithville, you're no longer in a rural setting, right? There's no sense of you're in a rural setting, right? Because you've gone through no rural to get to you, right? And so that southern green space really creates that distinguishing, it's the break, right? And the moment that's gone, no matter if you put up a big sign, you've lost the rural feel, right? You may still be able to create the small town and the downtown and so on. But I think that's part of it. And so from a planning point of view, then it's thinking about, okay, how do you memorialize that buffer, right? What do you have to do to how big does that need to be, and what tools do you have, and how fast do you need to move, right? So an annexation and all those sort of things come to play on that as well. John, I was seeing you wanted to jump in there too.
yeah, no, that's a great point. And kind of to bridge, frankly, David, your point and Leslie's and Melissa's, I think that there's kind of, especially your point, Melissa, in terms of the uniqueness here. I think that there could be a really cool experience going from having a green buffer, having that green space, and then as opposed to hitting sprawl, as opposed to just like slowly kind of having that kind of traditional like increase in density, but if you kind of then start with a little bit of density, so that you have that experience of, you have the kind of that firm gateway experience of, now I'm in a town. I left a town, I'm in rural, and now I've just entered a town, not just kind of the slowly incremental, and that may provide an opportunity then to have kind of those two sets of gateway experiences. To your point, Leslie, of first you have the experience of, I've now entered Smithville, And then as you progress, you have a kind of a secondary experience of, here's how you go. I turn right now, and now I've entered downtown. So I think that's that's a really interesting concept to me.
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes along with, we wanted that downtown oasis. If you hit that industrial higher density, and as you come further north, I think you start calming down a little bit more and you see that unique oasis. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Really from a design point of view, it reminds me very much of, Frank Lloyd Wright, who you'd all know as, one of America's most famous architect, but he had that whole thing of compression and release, right? This sense of you'd go through like you said, Melissa, something that's like a bit more like intense, right? And then there's kind of a sense of space, and all these famous buildings have that, right? And I really think experientially, that's kind of what I hear the Downtown Community Oasis is all about, right? That you've come from wherever, you've been working, busy, whatever, and then you sort of turn in there, and there's that sense of like, even the downtown out into the sort of green space on the other side. So interesting. So other comments on this? So from people. So Lara, do you want to jump in? Angela, Danny, thoughts on this?
David looked like he was starting to lean in. I was like, oh, is he going to say something? So no worries if not. But
so do you think generally this sort of approach of really trying to think about, the corridor and the approaches and all those things, do you think that's like a really critical part of the small town field? Is that, I know you're polled pretty strong, right? Because the thing is, I think it's been a sort of a blind spot for the community, quite frankly, right? Because you've been a small town, but you've grown so much, so fast, and also Kansas City's now growing. And John, you talked about this the other night about, what did you call it? The quarter that has all the growth in a...
Yeah, the favorite quarter of growth.
The favorite quarter of growth, right? And there's a reasonable expectation to think that some of the development patterns around Kansas City could pivot and head your way, right? Particularly with the redevelopment of the airport and those type of things. There could be some triggers that start to bring these changes faster. And so that's why I think the timing of this planning process, to sort of think about this now and try and get a bit of a coherent plan in place for what is this whole experience, because you are so long and thin and so many people live to the north end, you have to drive through that every day, right? So for a resident to be able to have some say at this point over what is that experience of your sort of journey through the community each day, I think it's just pretty, it's pretty fantastic to be able to be part of that. All right, so any other comments, thoughts?
David, I just wanted to jump off of that last bit that you said. I do live north of the city, so we live up in Harborview, and that is something that obviously stoplights are important and they're necessary, but we're getting more and more of them. And I feel like that just extends your commute and extends your commute and extends your commute. Whereas I think one of those polling questions was like, where should these retail and industrial things be? Right up on the road means we have loads more stoplights. We have to have more places where like the traffic crosses and people can walk and that kind of thing. Whereas if they're set off a little further, it can be something that could be like exited off of onto, so that it doesn't congest traffic that we already have going. But I feel like for that small town feel, it feels almost like it's a bigger thing because you have to have that buffer. And so it makes everything kind of look bigger. But I feel like if you butt right up on that main road, that's going to be congestion like crazy.
Yeah. And that's what that boulevard concept is, it's sort of how, it's like, if you think of it like how much water you get down a pipe, right? You can have a wider, slower moving is a different experience to narrow and, sort of bursts of speed, right? And what you're talking about is, you've got this sort of, bursts of speed and stop, go, right? And that really is completely counter to the small town feel and the type of experience you want. So.
Well, and even more than that, when my husband and I moved up here 10 years ago, we visited into Liberty a lot, and Liberty has some really great things, and they've grown and they've done some things just really, really well. But one of the things we always said was like, I never want to live there because it is where your time goes to die. Like there are a million stoplights. If you want to get anywhere, it's like if we're going, we're only going to this side of 35. We're not going to the other side because it takes too long to get there. And it's just, it's so much to get through that we never, most of their residential is on the side furthest from us. And so I was like, I don't want to live there and then work on this side of it, because then you got to drive through it all. And then the other thing is, and I mentioned in the chat, was their city limits, but right up against Kansas City, kind of like ours do. And I almost feel like Kansas City almost leached off of their western side, where they've built like this big, there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of residential stuff that they're putting there, but it's not tax dollars that's going into Liberty, it's tax dollars that go into Kansas City. And so it's not, they're not getting the benefit of it. They're just growing and having to deal with the growth, but it's not growth that they could manage on their own. So that's, I'm sure that that was kind of difficult, but it's just something that I feel like that green space would be really important to have there, so we don't have that issue.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's clear. All right, good. So let's let me just go back to screen sharing, and we're just going to set you up for next steps. And we have, like I said, we have a homework assignment, right? So which will be good homework. All right. So okay, moving forward to next step. So just to wrap this up, right? So so we have the next task force sessions are going to be the 31st of August and the first days of September, right? So we'll finalize that program and get that those dates out to you. What we're really trying to do is between now and then is to push a lot of the discussions from these task forces out into the community. And you'll start to see on the town's Facebook page, we'll be posting little snippets of, little sort of vignettes of factoids of, sort of ideas you came up with, or some of the polling and so on. We're also going to run a series of discussion topics, so where we can get some people to weigh in on things. And then obviously we want to regroup with each of the task force and be able to sort of narrow the lens a little bit and get down to some specific recommendations for the comp plan, right? And the idea is to then develop and have a draft comp plan available in September. In terms of what we think, so there's an assignment and then there's a bonus assignment, right? So here's what we would like to think about, or sort of have in the foreground of your mind over the next month until we re-meet. So as you live and work in Smithville over the next month, take note of anything, one, that reflects exactly what is the epitome of the small town feel and sense of community you seek, right? So there'll be things that you may not notice it, all the time, but if we kind of just have our sort of antenna up, you might go, oh yeah, that's it, that right there. It's either might be something or a moment or an experience or a place that is really the epitome of that, that sort of experience that we're looking for. And then also what is jarringly out of sync with the retention of the small town feel. So where do you see, or what do you see that is clearly the opposite end of what we're wanting to create, right? So, and especially pay note to the corridor and entrance experiences, right? So this is, we do our commutes every day and, we get sort of numb to it, right? So this is a chance just to kind of pay note. And we're going to also be posting these discussion topics that will be posted every few days on the portal. We'd love to see you to jump in on those and track some of those conversations and participate. And then the bonus assignment, right? Is to take some photos, right? So, because we're trying to develop a really visual sort of guide here, and it's one thing to talk about it or to do it in words and so on, but pictures will tell the story, right? And I think it'd be, we've got some ideas there about submit photos about, what is the best of the small town feel, sense of community and so on, right? But maybe, Leslie, this is where I was thinking that things that identify the classic might be really interesting to understand as a task force, what does classic and vibrant together look like to you? So do you think, Leslie, that'd be a good place to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, good. So so they're the assignments that we want to charge you with, right? And obviously, please stay in touch and you can follow things on the portal. But before we finish, let me just stop sharing. Any comments or topics you think we've missed or things you want to know more about, just a chance to make any requests of us or to contribute your final thoughts. Melissa, anything from you? I've never heard you so quiet.
Nope, I'm fine.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, this has been great. So John or Leslie, do you want to make any comments to?
No, I thought this was a great
No.
conversation.
All right.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive deeper into some of this in the discussion boards over the next month or so.
Good. Okay, great. All right, thank you. And so we'd also like you to obviously to put your eyes on the character areas as well. And as I said, if you go to the portal, you can, if you go to a little tag, it says a tab that says character areas, you can go in there and it scrolls down, right? And as I said, each one of those character areas is laid out. You can pull a sort of curtain backwards and forwards and look at the concept plan, so what's currently there and what's, perhaps proposed, and look at that as with the satellite overlay. And I think with, and what we're seeking is any kind of comments or feedback or thoughts about those, right? So that's what we really want to be nailing down, certainly at the next task force meeting and making any refinements. So, but I would just like to finish by just really thanking you for your input, right? This is the fourth of the task force meetings this week, right? And you can, we obviously have been to the others, and some of you have as well. But there's a real clear kind of narrative, I think, developing, and a real translation of a vision into a really practical and implementable framework on the ground. And I think the really interesting pieces will be these sort of more subtle things we talked about, like, how close to the road do some of those developments occur that either create a certain different experience, or the nuancing of classic and vibrant, what does that look like, and what are the colors and all those sort of pieces, right? So they're the fine brush strokes that we're starting to get to that I think will help really bring this alive. So I just want to call out to Linda and Jack at the city for helping set up and run all this, and great to see the aldermen participating and planning commission as well. So and if you have any questions, right, you can just fire those to us through the email address for the comp planning. And obviously, questions on the chat, we've noted those issues too. So that's all part of our collection. The presentations, or the slide deck from tonight, will be posted on the portal, as will the results from the rapid polling. So you'll be able to go in there and see those as we are doing for each of the task force sessions. And the recording of this too will be posted on the portal. So thanks for being part of really helping make this work. So Cynthia, did you want to have any final comment before we wrap up?
I would like just a second to thank everyone for your participation. This was great discussion tonight, and it's been fun to watch the evolution of this process build on itself throughout the week. And I specifically want to thank the team also, Leslie and Heather and John and David, for the time they've put in here. I don't know if all of you realize David is doing this from Ireland. So it is midnight where you are, correct, David?
That's right.
So,
yep.
And I'm
lucky you, but no.
yeah, and I'm getting texts and emails from him at 4 and 5 in the morning. So he's spent a lot of time thinking about this process, and we really appreciate, because we are richer for it and are going to have a plan when we're done that really reflects that community input, but then also is very definitely something to have guidance to move forward and take us into the future. So thank you, David and the team, and for all of you for your participation.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to seeing you on the next round.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a good evening. He is, but he lives in.